Hmm. Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Luke's Gospel, chapter 15, and chapters 15 and 16 and the beginning of 17 really is one thought. Jesus is responding to one statement or question, or I should say criticism. So all of the what we're going to be reading is going to be centered around that criticism. Now, as we get into it, the beginning of the parables today, we're going to get into the famous prodigal son story. But let me just say that the story of the prodigal son really isn't about the prodigal son. And I think sometimes people miss that. Excuse me. Sometimes people miss that, but we will we'll unpack it. So let's get into it. A fascinating story, and again, I know I say all of the Bible is fascinating when you really get into it and really unpack it. They are just fascinating stories, and um, so oh. Go to beginning, chapter 15, verse 1. And here's this statement I want to, I want to say, pay attention to, because this is why all these parables are about. He says, all the tax collectors and sinners were approaching to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were complaining. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Now, remember I said this is the epitome of religion, that the elements of bad religious, fake religious people who come in the name of God, people who represent God. And here is a religious form. And what we see when he says that the tax collector, the Pharisees, the scribes, they were the epitome even back then. If you were living back then, you would say the Pharisees and the scribes, these are the most holy men. These are the most learned men when it comes to God. But yet they were incredible hypocrites. Incredible. They were incredible hypocrites. And they just but yet this becomes the blueprint of every denomination you see today. Every single one of them have these elements of fake, false religion in them. And when you look at this, like, what do you think the purpose of religion, I should say, should be? Now, I know that there's some people that will say, well, I don't have a religion. I have a relationship with God. That's a cliche. That's a cliche. We have a lot of religious cliches in Christianity. And that's one of them. I have a relationship. Now, it's true. However, Christianity is very much religion and religious. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. In other words, my point is every Sunday, religious simply means an observance. Every Sunday you go to church. Every Sunday you pretty much do the same things every Sunday when you go to church. Right? You walk through the church doors, you're greeted, you have the singing portion of the church, then you have the offerings, and maybe they take the offering at the end, but you have so one or two may happen. So you have the singing portion. Then the pastor gives the announcements, and then he gives his sermon or teaching. And then, like I said, depending on, he may take the offering at the end of the service rather than the beginning of the service. And the reason why they do that is because they want the maximum amount of people that are there so they can get the maximum amount of money. Okay? So, and then some people do it between, some people take the offering between the singing part. Now, they call that worship. Okay? But the singing part and then the sermon. Again, the reason why they take the offerings there is to maximize the most amount of people that they can collect money from. But that, again, you do that every Sunday. Every single Sunday you do that. That's religion. Okay? That's religion. Now, religion, of course, the problem with religion is that you focus more on your tradition, more on your theology than you do people. And so a lot of churches really do not care about people. They care about their sermons, their churches. Okay? When you have a pastor who is very ambitious, he wants to grow a big church. Okay? He wants to grow a big church. So what does he do? He does all of the elements to make a church grow. Now you may say, well, isn't that a good thing that he's gathering people? It would be if the purpose is to shepherd them, but that's not their purpose. Their purpose is to grow a big church so that they can have fame, money, and fame. I know I said it twice. Okay? Build big edifices and to their glory. Okay? And usually what is left out is, again, the care of the people. And as I said before, you could leave a church, and a lot of times churches, they wouldn't care that you left. Some might reach out, but once you leave a church, they're done with you. Okay? And especially if it's a big church, because again, you're not going to be missed. But anyway, so this is the epitome here of this is the blueprint, and you'll find these elements in every church. Look, he says, all the tax collectors and sinners were approaching and listening to him. Now, on the other side of the pendulum, you have a lot of people who say, well, Jesus hung out with sinners. Now, they say that to try to justify their sinful behavior. So let's, so look at it. Jesus certainly hung out with tax collectors. But wait a minute, you're missing a big part. They were listening to him. He wasn't listening to them. He wasn't juking and twerking with them. The Pharisees saw this and were complaining. And watch this. They were demonizing the tax collectors. Now, tax collectors, and remember Jesus, one of his apostles, Matthew, was a tax collector. Okay, he was a tax collector. And they were hated by the Jewish people because they worked for Rome. They imposed, they collected the taxes under the Rome, and they would overcharge the people, and there was no appeal. No appeal. And Rome did not care, because as long as they have their taxes, they didn't care about that. But they were hated. And as a result, they were ostracized. And because of their greed, too, it just showed they became very sinful people. Now, the sinners, we use the word sinners in a broad way because of children of Adam. We are sinners by birth. We are sinners because Adam fell into sin. So because of that, but in this day, the term sinners were the very lewd people, the loose people. They were the partiers, revelers, right? Drunkards, raunchy, right? So that's that group. So the tax collectors and then sinners, okay? But they were listening. And shouldn't this have been what the Pharisees rejoiced in? Shouldn't they have rejoiced in the fact that the Messiah was reaching them, changing their lives? But what did they say? Ah, he eats with sinners. Ah, there was, and this kind of illustrates this. In the 60s, there is a movie out on this called The Jesus People. And now I'm saying they kind of illustrate this here. The Jesus People in the 60s, so it's an actual event, there is a movie about it now. And I believe one of the, you can almost say, persons who came out of that movie, Greg Laurie, produced the movie. And during this time, you had religious people. So like the Moore Majority Leader, Jerry Falwell, people like that. They were the epitome of religion. They were the epitome of evangelicalism, conservative evangelicalism. They were the epitome of um, um, denominationalism. Okay, so when you think about, if you go back and you look at pictures of Jerry Falwell, and you look at pictures of the evangelical, you look at pictures of all the denominations, here's the image you're going to see. You're going to see this facade. You're going to see this picture of a man with nice clean cut. He was nice trimmed hair. When they go to church, they wear suits. Their wives, their hair were done, and they wore nice dresses, right? And that was the image. You go to church every Sunday. You sang from hymnal, 357, if there's such a thing, and you had that image. On the black side, there was Pentecostal churches, what they call the sanctified churches. Same thing. When you go to church, you put on the suit, put on the dress, you comb your hair. You got, In fact, there's the term even called the Sunday best. And so that's the image, right? And then if someone came into the church, whether and like what was called in fact, a lot of people didn't even want to come in the church because they were made to feel unwelcome. They were made to feel different. If we think about this today, what if a member of the LGBTQ came into your church? I mean, and they looked like it. They looked it. Whether a person who, whatever it is, right? They came in, and of course, it's apparent, But back then, there was the 60s. In the 60s, you had the hippies, the hippie movement. And the hippie movement was really the very opposite of these clean-cut, wholesome-looking people. The hippies they grew their hair out, beards and hair, long hair, right? I could never be a hippie because my hair would never grow that long. But but so they would come, they would wear jeans, and oftentimes dirty jeans, no shirt, so the movement started in California, and so what you had is you had the hippie movement that was called the counter culture, which was counter to what those who were in power said. This is how you ought to look. Well, the hippies rebelled against that, and so you had free love, sex, all that kind of stuff. There was a man by the name of Chuck Smith who started a church, and this is where this movie, The Jesus People, came. He came out of denominations, and he began to just teach the Bible verse by verse. And as a result, his church began to grow, but he also attracted hippies, where denominations were rejecting them. They were rejecting them. He would open his doors. They'd come in, sometimes sit on the floor, have just jeans on, no shirt, whatever. It was abhorrent to the denomination, but he began to teach. So as I said, as a result, there were several well-known hippies that came out of the Calvary Chapel movement. Greg Laurie was one of them. But when I say that is because, and you get to have your criticism in terms of the Calvary Chapel movement, and people did, but so goes the same with all denominations. The fact that he opened his doors, and that's what I wanted to kind of focus on, the fact that he opened his doors and taught them the word, produced a very explosive movement, like I say, that later became known as the Jesus people. Now, as I said, I think the Calvary Chapel movement, and it also became what later exploding what's called the Calvary Chapel movement. And now, even to this day, they're all over the world. And they have their criticisms. Like I say, all denominations, all movement would have their criticisms. Okay. But the biggest thing that I want to say is that here what you had was, in a sense, Chuck Smith was part of the counterculture, because what denominations rejected, and here what you have here is the same thing. You have the Pharisees and the scribes, who were the epitome. They dressed apart. They walked apart. They did their hand things, ooh, right? But then they were incredible hypocrites themselves. But they rejected the tax collectors. They rejected the sinners. So now they were complaining against him. They said, this man eats with sinners. He welcomes them. So then what would be the question? What would be the question? That God rejects them? That God rejects people that don't dress like you? That don't dress proper? That don't cut their hair? Now, when I was growing up, I came after the 70s. So my teenage years was during the 70s, in the height of, what we call the naturals. People call them today afros. We didn't use that terminology, but okay. But it's the big afros, right? And again, I could never grow one. But see, a lot of the church called that worldly. We had very flashy looking clothes, bell bottoms, platforms, flowery shirts, butterfly sleeve shirts. See, these were things that were apparent, obvious, and yet they were called worldly by the church. They were called worldly. So if you dress like that, then the church would be you. You go into a church, they would kind of look at you. You was made to feel out of place. And one of the signs that showed them that you were saved was that you cut your afro off. You didn't wear your bell bottoms, and you certainly didn't wear the butterfly sleeve flowery print shirt. I used to think they were silk shirts, but they just simply were nylons. Okay. But this is what they were. This is the blueprint. Like I said, so the same characteristics of denominations right here. The same. So watch this. So verse 3 says, so he told them this parable. This is in response to their questions. What man among you who has 100 sheep and loses one of them does not leave the 99 in the open field and go after the lost one until he finds it? And when he has found it, he joyfully puts on his shoulders puts it on his shoulders. And coming home, he called his friends and neighbors together, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." I tell you, in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over the 99 righteous people who don't need repentance. Now, kind of keep this in mind, because he's getting ready to tell the story of the prodigal son. Okay? I want you to keep that in mind, because this time it goes together. When you have one sinner repentant, and then in heaven, then the 99 righteous people, there's no rejoicing. But keep that in mind, because that thought is going to come up. Because the prodigal son, remember I said the story of the prodigal son isn't about the prodigal son. The prodigal son is about these 99 righteous people. Keep that in mind. The prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son, is about the 99 righteous people. Or the son that did not go away, and he was mad because, why are you throwing this party for him? But anyway, he said, verse 8, "Oh, what woman who has lost 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, search carefully until she finds it? When she finds it, she calls her woman friends and neighbors together, saying, 'Rejoice with me, because I have found a silver coin that I've lost.' I tell you, in the same way, there is joy in heaven in the presence of the angels over one sinner who repents." So using the silver coin expression, now again, there's no rejoicing over the coins that are not lost. But remember, as we get into this prodigal son, and this is what this story is really going to be about, okay? Because the question is going to be, shouldn't you rejoice over this lost coin? Shouldn't you rejoice over the lost sheep? Right? Now, I'm probably just going to get into just reading this today, and I'll come back with this tomorrow. He also said, "A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that I have come to me.' So he distributed his assets to them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered together all that he had and traveled to a distant country, where he squandered his estate in foolish living. After he had spent everything, and a severe famine struck the country, he had nothing. Then he went to work for one of the citizens in that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs." Now, from a Jewish standpoint, get the imagery. This is how low he has come. He's feeding pigs. Excuse me. Verse 16 says, "He longed to eat his fill from the corrupt pods the pigs were eating, but no one would give him any. And when it came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger? I'll get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired hands.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while his son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran." That's a wonderful song that I've been hearing for many, many years about this very phrase. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But his father told his slaves, Quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and his sandals and on his feet. Then bring out the fatted calf and slaughter it. And let us celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive. He was lost and he is found. So they began to celebrate. Then I'll stop here, and I'm gonna come back and dissect this story. No, first I'll finish reading. Now his oldest son was in the field, and when he came near to the house, he heard the music and dancing. So he summoned one of his servants and asked what these things meant. He said, Your brother is here, he told them, and your father has slaughtered the fatted lamb, because he has had them back safe and sound. And he became angry and didn't want to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him, but he replied to his father, look, I've been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a young goat so that I can celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours has come, who has devoured your assets with prostitute, you slaughtered the fatted calves for him. Son, he said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because his brother of yours was dead. He is alive again. He is lost and he is found. I'll come back and I want to break this parable down because it is a truly wonderful story. And that's why I told you, if you look at towards the end, that's what the real story is about. Because remember, you go back to the beginning, Jesus was criticized for receiving sinners and prostitutes, you know, and not kind of hanging out with the Pharisees, hypocrites, and the scribes. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you next time.